I've spent half my life chasing silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that hangs over a place so long it starts to hum. The kind that fills your chest until you can't tell if you're breathing or just listening. That's what drew me back to Mount Baker. Or maybe it was something else, something older than reason, older than the way I've tried to forget. My name's Eli Mercer, 41 years old. I make my living repairing camper vans and old RVs, and I take them out for test drives every now and then, just to keep them alive. That's what I told myself this trip was, a test drive. But the truth is, I came here because my father used to camp along the same mountain road when I was a kid. Back then, he said the ground here had a pulse. I laughed at him. He'd press his hand into the dirt and whisper, "It's breathing, son. You just have to listen slow enough." I never forgot that. Not because it was wise, but because I saw something in his face when he said it. Something like fear dressed up as reverence. I parked the RV just off Glacier Creek Road, about 12 miles from the main trailhead. The air was cool, still heavy from early autumn rain, and the sky sat low enough that the tree line seemed to swallow it. I stepped out, boots sinking into the wet ground, and the scent of cedar hit me, rich and old, like damp wood inside a forgotten church. Everything was muffled. The stream nearby, the rustle of wind. Even the RV's ticking engine faded quick, as if the forest didn't want to remember sound. The first night was quiet in a way I didn't trust. I kept the small lantern burning while I cooked on the tiny stovetop. I ate slowly, watching the thin flame flicker against the aluminum walls. The forest pressed close around me, and somewhere in that dark wait, I thought I heard a low vibration. Not a sound, exactly. More like pressure beneath the floor. A faint rhythmic push that came and went. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or maybe the mountain settling under the chill, but when I stepped outside and crouched near the fire ring, the feeling deepened. The ground beneath my palms was cold and faintly quivering, like something massive moving far below. That's when I remembered something else my father once said, during his last trip here before the accident that took him. If you hear it breathing, you need to listen to what it's saying. He was gone 3 weeks later, found near the tree line, miles from his camp. No one ever figured out what he was doing out there. I tried not to think about that as I stood in the dark, but the memory pressed through anyway. The same rain-soaked soil, the same trees leaning close, like they were listening too. The second day, the silence changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was expectant. I hiked a short trail north, following the curve of the creek until the sound of rushing water grew sharp. There were carvings on a few fallen trees, circles interlocked, shallow and uneven, like someone had scratched them there with a rock. They didn't look new. Moss had grown into the cuts, softening their edges. When I brushed one with my fingers, I noticed the wood was warm. The air around it wasn't. That warmth seeped into my hand like a pulse. By the time I got back to camp, the light was fading. I kept the fire going longer than usual, trying to burn off the damp that had crept into my clothes. But even with the flames crackling, I couldn't shake that faint vibration beneath my boots. The ground seemed to thrum when I walked, subtle but steady. Once I pressed my ear to the soil, half laughing at myself, and stopped breathing when I heard it. A hollow exhale, deep and drawn out, like the land was sighing through its roots. It came and went in intervals, long, slow, patient. That night, I dreamed of my father. He was kneeling by a campfire, pressing both hands to the earth. His mouth moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then his eyes lifted toward me, clouded, not angry, but pleading. I woke up gasping, my throat dry. The lantern had gone out, and the RV felt wrong, tilted slightly, like one of the tires had sunk. When I stepped outside to check, I froze. Around the base of the RV, the soil had cracked in a faint circular pattern, no wider than a few feet, the same pattern as the carvings on the fallen trees. I crouched down, heart thudding, and the moment my fingers brushed the dirt, I felt it again, the pulse, stronger this time, like the earth beneath me was awake. Morning came slow and colorless. A thin fog rolled off the mountain, weaving through the cedars. My body felt heavy, as if I hadn't really slept at all. I tried to shake it off, brewed coffee, and told myself it was just the altitude messing with my head. Still, part of me wanted to leave. Another part, the stubborn one that had always chased the truth of my father's stories, wanted to stay until I understood. By late afternoon, the fog thickened into something almost physical. I could see maybe 20 feet ahead before everything dissolved into gray. The silence deepened, pressing into my ears until even my heartbeat sounded strange. Then came the smell, wet soil mixed with something faintly metallic, like rust. I walked toward it, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught the outline of an old campsite, half collapsed, a rusted lantern, a folding chair lying on its side, and near the edge, a ring of stones marking a fire pit filled not with ash but dark, damp soil. Kneeling beside it, I noticed faint impressions on the ground, handprints, small ones, maybe a child's. The soil beneath them still looked disturbed, as though pressed into place recently. The air around the pit felt warmer than the rest of the clearing. My gut twisted. I backed away, but my boot caught on a root that shouldn't have been there. It rose out of the ground like a pale, twisted vein, curling toward my ankle. I stumbled, shining the light on it, and froze. It wasn't wood. The texture was wrong, smooth, faintly translucent, pulsing beneath the skin of dirt. I could see something dark moving within it, slow as sap. My breath caught in my throat. The ground shuddered once, faint but unmistakable, and that same deep, hollow exhale rolled through the clearing again, louder now, like something massive stirring beneath me. The earth itself was breathing. I ran. Back through the fog, past the creek, until the RV's shape appeared like a ghost through the gray. I locked myself inside and turned every light on. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys. For hours, I sat there, listening to the rain begin again, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion, imagination, grief manifesting in the soil. But as the rain fell harder, the rhythm of it began to sync with something deeper, the same slow, steady pulse beneath the wheels. That was the first night I heard it speak. It started faint, just a low murmur beneath the rhythm of the rain. At first, I thought it was wind pushing through the canyon, a hollow tone that rose and fell with the gusts. But then it began to form something close to words, not words I could understand, just cadence, repetition. The sound of breath drawn in through something enormous, exhaled through the cracks of the mountain. Each cycle felt closer, slower, deliberate. I sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, my flashlight pointed at the fogged window. The light reflected back my own face, pale and tight. I turned off the lantern to listen better, and that's when it changed. The hum deepened into a low groan, rising up from beneath the tires. I could feel it through the soles of my boots. Then came a new sound, soft pops like soil shifting under pressure. The RV tilted slightly to one side. My pulse jumped. I killed the engine and stepped outside, the cold rain hitting me hard. The ground squelched beneath my boots, slick and uneven. My flashlight beam cut through the mist, landing on small mounds in the dirt, 5 or 6 of them, forming a crooked arc around where the RV sat. They hadn't been there before. Each one pulsed faintly, as if the rain itself was being pushed back from the soil's surface. I crouched near one, the beam shaking in my hand, and saw a faint vapor rising from a crack in the center. The air smelled sharp, metallic again, like blood in water. I reached out without thinking. The instant my fingers brushed that crack, I felt warmth, deep, wet warmth that moved. It flinched under me, recoiling like muscle. I stumbled back, breath catching in my throat, and the mound flattened itself slowly as though inhaling again. I backed away until my shoulder hit the RV door, grabbed the handle, and climbed in fast, locking it behind me. The sound outside had shifted again, no longer breathing, not exactly. More like whispering, filtered through earth and rain. That was when I saw the condensation on the window, shaped like a hand. Not mine. It pressed there for a moment, fingers long and uneven, before fading back to I don't remember sleeping that night. I must have drifted in and out, my mind caught between the sound of the rain and that low, murmuring rhythm beneath it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw roots. Tangled, pale roots moving like veins through the dark, pulsing in slow harmony with my heartbeat. When dawn finally came, the forest looked different. The fog had lifted, but the air felt heavier. Everything glistened wet and dark, and I could see steam rising from patches of ground across the clearing. I went out to check the tires. Each one was half sunk into soft earth, as though the ground had softened overnight. My father's words kept echoing. If you hear it breathing, you need to listen to what it's saying. So I did. I knelt by the rear bumper, pressed my palm to the dirt, and closed my eyes. The pulse was still there, slow and steady, and underneath it, something else, like the echo of a heartbeat, faint and uneven. Then a vibration spread up through my hand into my arm. It was subtle at first, then stronger, until I realized it wasn't the ground shaking. It was me, my pulse syncing with that rhythm. I pulled back, but the sensation didn't stop. The rhythm kept going in my chest. That's when I noticed the carvings again. They were on the trees nearest the RV now, those same interlocked circles, but deeper, fresher. The bark around them still oozed sap, sticky and red. There must have been 10 of them, surrounding my camp like a boundary. I didn't remember seeing them the night before. I couldn't have missed them. I decided to leave. I didn't care about the fog or the test drive or the memories anymore. I packed everything fast, lantern, food, my father's old hunting knife, and threw it in the back. When I turned the ignition, the RV coughed but didn't start. Tried again, nothing but a hollow click. The battery was fine. The lights still worked. It was as if the fuel line had been cut off. I swore under my breath, grabbed my jacket, and stepped out to check underneath. That's when I saw them. Thin strands pushing up through the gravel, pale and wet like veins. They wound around the tires and under the chassis, pulsing faintly. I reached down with a stick and tried to pry one loose, but it snapped like cartilage, oozing a dark, reddish sap that smelled almost sweet. The soil beneath was moving, rising in small waves. I dropped the stick, scrambled to my feet, and ran back into the RV. The engine caught on the next try, coughing thick smoke, but the wheels wouldn't move. The back tires spun uselessly, buried half a foot deep. I floored the accelerator, the roar echoing through the clearing, but the RV just sank deeper. It felt like the mountain was holding me in place. Then the dashboard lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. The engine died mid-rev. Silence fell again, thick and total. I sat there for a long time, staring out the windshield at the fog creeping back through the trees. My heartbeat wouldn't calm down. Every instinct told me to run, to get out, to climb until I hit the road again. But something in that silence held me. A whisper that wasn't sound but thought, "You came back." The air inside the RV changed, warmer, damp. A smell like fresh earth filled it. Then, from beneath the floor, a soft knock. Once, then again, slower. A rhythm matching the pulse in my chest. I crouched, pressing my ear to the metal floor. The sound was unmistakable, something shifting below, pressing upward. I grabbed the knife, not knowing what I'd do with it, and braced myself as another knock came, harder this time. Then the metal dented. A round bulge rose under the floor near the sink, slow but firm, the steel creaking as it lifted. My breath froze. I backed away toward the door, but before I could reach it, the dent spread, cracking open with a soft, tearing sound. A thin root, white and glistening, pushed through the gap, curling like a finger. It slid across the floor toward me, leaving a faint trail of red behind it. I kicked it back instinctively, my boot slamming into it. It recoiled, vanishing beneath the floor, and for a moment everything went still. Then the pulse came again, harder, deeper. The whole RV shuddered. I threw the door open and ran into the rain. The forest around me was alive now. The soil rippled in waves, roots pushing up through the mud, twisting, reaching. The trees creaked like bones under pressure, their branches bending as if straining toward the center of the clearing. I stumbled backward, slipping in the mud, and heard that same deep exhale roll through the ground, louder than ever. The earth was breathing in earnest now, drawn out, rhythmic, terrifyingly alive. I turned toward the slope behind the creek, thinking, if I could make it to higher ground, I might get a signal, maybe find the road again. But as I climbed, the ground softened beneath my feet, sucking at my boots. Each step took more effort. The sound grew louder, like a heartbeat amplified through the roots. Then over it all, I heard my name. It was my father's voice, soft, almost gentle, Eli. I froze. The sound came from below, from the soil itself. My chest went cold. He said it again, clearer this time, closer. Eli, you have to listen. I stumbled forward, half sliding down the slope, until I reached a fallen log slick with rain. My father's old campsite wasn't far from here. He died somewhere near this very ridge. The thought hit me like a blow. He hadn't wandered off by accident. He'd followed something. The voice came again, not from one place but everywhere at once, the air trembling with it. The ground remembers. And then the soil beneath my feet opened. The collapse happened so fast I didn't have time to scream. The ground gave way in a circle around me, and for one weightless instant I was suspended in the fog before dropping through mud and roots. The world spun, colors blurring into black streaks, until I hit something soft and wet below. The air burst out of my lungs. When I opened my eyes, everything glowed faintly red. My flashlight was gone, but the soil itself shimmered with dull light, like veins pulsing under translucent skin. I was inside some kind of hollow chamber, maybe 15 feet below the surface, the walls slick and alive. Roots hung in thick curtains, twitching with every breath of the mountain. I lay still for a moment, gasping, too stunned to move. Then I heard it again, my father's voice. Close this time, too close. Eli, it said softly, like it was behind me. I turned, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Only a shape, an outline half buried in the wall of the chamber, a figure wrapped in roots. The light shimmered across pale skin, stretched thin over bone. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. A human face, hollow-eyed, caught mid-expression, his mouth slightly open as if still whispering. My breath hitched. It was him, my father. The roots held him like veins around an organ, pulsing faintly with that same rhythm. The light came from within them, moving like a heartbeat. I stumbled closer, my mind refusing to process what I saw. His skin looked preserved, not decomposed, almost absorbed into the mountain. One of his hands rested against the wall, fingers pressed into the glowing soil. The same position I'd seen in my dreams. I whispered his name, barely audible. The chamber responded with a faint exhale that stirred the roots. For a second, the whole place seemed to breathe. The light dimmed, then brightened again. And when it did, I saw the carvings, those interlocked circles, etched into the soil all around him. They weren't symbols, they were maps. Veins. Paths leading outward in every direction, connecting this chamber to something far deeper. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, but part of me, some awful magnetic part, needed to understand. I reached out, trembling, and pressed my hand against the same wall where his rested. The soil was warm, the pulse met my palm instantly, syncing with my heartbeat. For a moment, I couldn't tell which was mine. Then came the whisper. Not through sound, but through pressure inside my skull, a thought that wasn't my own. He listened. You wouldn't. I yanked my hand back, stumbling, heart slamming against my ribs. The chamber responded with a groan, and the roots above began to tighten. Clumps of soil fell from the ceiling. I could see them moving now, thick tendrils slithering toward me through the dirt, twitching like muscles. The air turned hot and wet, heavy with the smell of iron and rot. Why? I shouted, what do you want from me? The mountain answered in pulses. The light brightened, washing the walls in a deep crimson glow. My father's lips twitched. I swear they did. Then a sound filled the chamber, a deep, resonant hum that rattled my bones. It wasn't words, but I could feel meaning pressing against me, forcing its way in. We remember who listens. The ground under me shifted. A thick root burst from the floor, coiling around my ankle. I kicked hard, but it held tight, pulling me toward the wall. The pressure built until I felt my legs start to give. I slashed at it with the knife, slicing through the flesh-like bark. Dark sap sprayed hot against my skin. The root recoiled, hissing, and I scrambled backward, clawing toward the narrow shaft where I'd fallen through. The walls pulsed harder now, roots lashed around and closing in like ribs. I grabbed at them, digging my fingers into the slippery soil, trying to climb. Each movement made the chamber groan louder. My hand found a foothold, then another. I pulled myself upward, lungs burning, the light below flickering like a dying heart. When I looked down one last time, I saw my father's body sink deeper into the wall, the roots tightening around him until only his hand remained visible. The fingers twitched once, just once, and then vanished beneath the surface. The pulse slowed. I dragged myself through the opening and rolled onto the forest floor, gasping, covered in mud and blood and that strange red sap. The air outside was freezing, but I barely felt it. The fog was gone now, the sky a pale, bruised gray. For a moment, everything was still. Then the ground shifted again. A low rumble spread through the clearing, shaking the trees. I staggered to my feet and ran, past the creek, through the ferns, up the narrow slope that led back to the main road. Each step seemed to echo with that same deep pulse. Behind me, the earth cracked open in slow, widening lines, steam rising from the fractures. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the road, the rain had started again, soft and steady. My RV sat half buried, tilted at an angle. I climbed inside, shaking, mud dripping onto the floor. The moment I turned the key, the engine started without hesitation. No hesitation at all, like nothing had ever been wrong. I drove for miles before I stopped shaking. The mountain faded behind me, hidden by fog again, as if it had swallowed its secret whole. But even now, weeks later, I still feel it. At night, when I lie in bed, I hear a faint rhythm beneath the floorboards. It's subtle, almost gentle, like something breathing under the earth, far away but moving closer each night. I tell myself it's just the old pipes, the creak of the house settling, but sometimes when I press my hand to the floor, the pulse matches my heartbeat exactly. And sometimes I hear him, my father, just on the edge of sleep. The ground remembers. I didn't go back to work for nearly a month after that. Couldn't. Every time I heard the sound of an engine turning over or smelled damp soil on the air, it sent a tremor through me. I told the guys at the garage I'd caught the flu, that I just needed some time to get my head straight. The truth was, I was afraid of everything that touched the ground. I started sleeping in the upstairs guest room of my house in Bellingham. Wood floors, no basement. I told myself it was to get better air, but the truth was simpler. I wanted distance. From the earth itself. But distance isn't always measured in feet. Sometimes the thing you're trying to escape finds a way to rise beneath you, no matter how far you move. At night, I dream in red light. Always the same rhythm pulsing beneath the soil. Sometimes I'd see my father still kneeling beside that fire, pressing his hands into the ground. But now he wasn't whispering. He was listening, his face calm, almost relieved as the dirt climbed up to meet him. When I woke, the rhythm would linger in my pulse, slow and steady, echoing in the space between my ribs. One morning, I went down to the waterfront to clear my head. The air smelled of salt and diesel, the kind of smell that's supposed to remind you you're still part of the living world. I watched ferries slide across the gray water, and for a while I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Then a barge horn sounded in the distance, a low, drawn-out note that rolled through the water and into my bones, and I froze. The pitch, the vibration, it was the same frequency as that breath beneath the mountain. I drove home, shaking, knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I got there, I found something waiting on the porch, a small clump of dirt, damp and dark, sitting neatly on the doormat. No footprints, no sign of where it came from, just the soil, threaded with pale, thin roots that pulsed faintly when I touched them. I threw it into the trash can and told myself it was just a trick of the light. But that night I heard it again, the pulse through the floor. Stronger now, steady as a heartbeat. I started researching. Old forestry records, geological surveys, even local native stories from the Mount Baker foothills. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. There were reports, hundreds of them, stretching back nearly a century, people disappearing near Glacier Creek Road, hikers found half buried in soft earth, stories of the mountain taking back what listens. A geologist's note from 1963 described unexplained subsurface movements resembling respiratory pressure waves. He called it cyclic breathing of the ground. The oldest record was a handwritten entry from a local newspaper dated 1911. Miners report hearing sighs from the soil, as if the mountain were alive. Those who stayed too long began to speak of the roots, calling them by name. That was enough. I packed a bag, planning to leave Washington entirely. I figured if the mountain had a reach, maybe I could outrun it. I threw my things into the back of my pickup and drove east before sunrise. The first 100 miles were easy. The air felt lighter the farther I got. Then, somewhere near Spokane, I stopped for gas. When I got out, my boots sank slightly into the gravel, not much, just enough to make a faint imprint. I didn't think anything of it until I noticed what the gravel was mixed with. Soil. Damp, dark soil. And underneath it, a tiny white root curling through the cracks. I stared at it for a long time, unable to move. The gas station attendant asked if I was okay. I nodded, but I wasn't. Because when I looked up at the horizon, I could see the Cascades fading behind me in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw the slope of Mount Baker pulse, just once, like a lung-drawing breath. I left the state that night, but it didn't matter. The pulse followed. Not always loud, not always near, but there in moments of stillness. In hotel floors, in the hum of the tires against the road, in the sound of my own heartbeat, too steady, too synchronized. The more I ran, the clearer the message became. Not a threat, but a kind of truth I hadn't wanted to hear. The mountain wasn't reaching for me. It wasn't hunting or haunting. It was calling something back, something it had lost. I stopped outside Missoula 3 days later, parked by a field thick with autumn grass, and walked out barefoot into the dirt. The ground was cool, still damp from the night rain. I knelt, pressing my hands into it like my father used to. The pulse came almost instantly, slow, familiar. For the first time, I didn't pull away. I let it move through me, steady, patient, ancient. And in that vibration, I felt something that wasn't fear. It was recognition. The same quiet rhythm that beats in the veins of every living thing. The sound of belonging. All this time, I'd been afraid of what my father meant when he said the ground breathes. I thought it was madness. I thought it was a curse. But now I understand. The earth remembers every step, every voice, every buried grief. It holds us even after we leave it behind. I left Mount Baker, but it didn't leave me. It can't, because we were never separate in the first place. When I drive now, I sometimes find my hand drifting to the floorboard, fingers resting lightly on the steel. Beneath the hum of the engine, I can feel it, the faintest echo of that slow, patient heartbeat. Not warning, not threat, just reminder. The ground beneath us isn't dead. It never was. It breathes, it listens. And sometimes when the silence is deep enough, it speaks our names back to remind us where we came from and where we'll return. My name's Mark Bennett. I'm 51 years old, a retired field engineer from southern Utah. I've been living on the road for the past 4 years, part escape, part therapy, part unfinished business with the land I grew up in. I always thought I understood the wilderness, the wind, the cold, the unbroken silence of places where maps feel like lies. But lately, I'm not so sure what I've been hearing out there really belongs to the earth. It started with stories, campfire talk, shared by people whose hands still smelled like diesel and pine sap. The kind of stories you only hear after midnight when someone's courage starts to loosen with the bottle. They'd talk about lights that followed their rigs through mountain passes, about voices under bridges, about waking up parked somewhere else entirely. Most of them laughed it off, but I kept listening, not because I believed them, but because I'd already started hearing things too. I was camped near the edge of the Mojave that night, late March. The air was bone dry and perfectly still. My RV was parked against a low ridge, and beyond that ridge stretched a flat plain of pale dirt that shimmered under the moon like water. I'd chosen that spot for solitude. No hookups, no noise, no glow from other camps. I wanted to think. I wanted to breathe. Around midnight, I stepped outside with a flashlight. The stars were so sharp they looked like they could slice skin. I remember staring up, wondering if the loneliness I'd been feeling was just my mind playing tricks. Then I heard it, the faint click of gravel behind me. Slow, deliberate, steady, like someone walking barefoot. At first, I assumed it was an animal, maybe a stray coyote. I scanned the beam across the dirt, expecting to catch the yellow flash of eyes. Nothing, just the ridge, the still air, the shadow of my RV. But the sound didn't stop. It circled. I could hear it crunching, moving around the vehicle. Every time I turned, it stayed behind me, as though it were studying the rhythm of my breath. I whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" My voice came out softer than I wanted. No answer. I swung the flashlight in a wide arc again. The dirt was unmarked. No tracks, no movement, just empty space. The sound stopped. The silence afterward wasn't natural. It was heavy, pressing in on the eardrums like deep water. When I finally went back inside and locked the door, I told myself it was probably my imagination. The desert can play tricks on you when there's nothing else to hear. Still, that night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to what I thought was the faint sound of my radio crackling, even though it wasn't on. Static, rising and falling like someone trying to tune into my frequency. I reached for the CB on the dash. It was off. I unplugged it anyway. The static kept going, this soft hiss coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then it spoke. Just one word. My name. It was whisper quiet, stretched out in the static like a breath through broken wires. Mark. I froze. My first thought was that it was someone on the same radio band messing around, but I'd unplugged the damn thing. And still, my name lingered in the air, a vibration in the silence, faint but unmistakable. That was the first time I truly questioned whether I was alone. The next morning, everything looked normal. The world was calm again, the sun low and golden, the sand untouched, the ridge painted orange by early light. I laughed it off. I told myself I was tired, maybe even half dreaming. You can't live on the road this long without your mind filling empty spaces with echoes. But something had changed. I felt watched, even in daylight. My reflection in the RV window seemed slightly delayed, like it was thinking before it moved. I'd turn around mid-breakfast, convinced someone had called my name from outside. I left that spot by noon and headed north toward the Sierra foothills, trying to shake the feeling. 2 nights later, I parked near a small campground outside Lone Pine. There were other RVs scattered across the flats, enough light and chatter to make me feel grounded again. I made small talk with a couple from Oregon who'd been traveling south. They told me about a strange hum that woke them in the middle of the night, a deep vibration that shook the metal siding of their rig like a heartbeat. They thought it might have been seismic activity until they realized nothing else was moving. Not the trees, not the dirt, not even their water glasses. That was when I started noticing how many people had these kinds of stories. Not ghosts, not monsters, just something that shouldn't exist, yet does. Over coffee the next morning, I asked an older camper named Roy, Vietnam vet, been RVing since the 70s, if he'd ever heard weird things out here. He smiled like a man who'd already given up trying to explain. "You'll hear the earth talking, son," he said. "Sometimes she talks to herself. Sometimes she talks through you." I didn't know what that meant at the time. Later that day, I decided to hike up a canyon nearby. The trail cut through a ravine lined with gray boulders and twisted junipers. It was quiet, too quiet. Even my footsteps felt muffled, like the air itself was absorbing sound. Halfway up, I noticed something strange. The rocks around me weren't just gray. They were marked. Not with graffiti, not with natural erosion. These were symbols. Circular carvings, perfect in shape, etched into the stone. Some were shallow, others deep enough to cast shadows. The deeper I went, the more symbols I found. I started taking photos, and then a smell hit me. Metallic, faintly sweet, like rain on blood. It seemed to move with the wind, circling, closing in. My vision blurred for a moment, and in that dizzy haze, I thought I saw someone standing between the rocks ahead, a figure, tall and motionless, wearing something like an old parka. I called out. No answer. The figure didn't move. When I blinked, it was gone. When I finally made it back to camp, the couple from Oregon had left without a word. Their chairs were still out, the fire pit still warm, but their RV was gone. Later that night, I saw their rig's headlights far across the desert heading west. Except the road in that direction led to nowhere, just dry washes and dead land for miles. I never saw them again. That night, the static came back. Only this time, it wasn't just my name. It was a whispering, layered voice, echoing from the thin metal of the RV walls, repeating the same phrase over and over. Do you hear it now? And I did. God help me. I did. I didn't leave the next morning. Some part of me thought it would be smarter to just pack up, drive north, and never look back, but I couldn't. Something about the words, the static, the smell of that canyon, it hooked into me. Not like curiosity, more like compulsion. I had to understand. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's foolishness, but I've never been the type to turn my back when the unknown stares me down. The day passed without incident. I walked through town, bought fuel, grabbed some supplies at a general store. Nobody there seemed to notice anything strange. I asked the cashier, young woman, couldn't have been more than 20, if she'd ever heard weird signals on radios out here. She hesitated, then said, sometimes, yeah. My dad used to call it the miner's echo. He worked the shafts near Cerro Gordo and swore he could hear voices in the rock. Not ghosts, just something repeating what was already said, like a bad recording. Her eyes lingered on me for a second, like she was wondering if she'd said too much. I thanked her, left, and carried that phrase back with me. The miner's echo. That night, camp felt heavier. The air was cold, colder than the forecast said it should be. My breath came out in thick plumes, frosting the glass. I made the mistake of turning the CB back on, thinking maybe I'd pick up something explainable, an interference pattern, a stray signal. What I got instead was silence. Not just quiet, dead air. When I switched bands, every channel hummed with the same faint static, no variation, like the whole desert was broadcasting the same frequency at once. Around midnight, I heard knocking. Not on the door, not on the roof. It was softer, stranger, a hollow thud-thud-thud coming from beneath the RV. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks again. I froze in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. Finally, I grabbed a flashlight and opened the side door. The desert was empty, flat and pale under the moon. I got down on my knees, swept the beam under the rig. Nothing, just dirt. I even crawled under there, hands pressing into the cold ground, searching for any sign. No animal, no tracks, nothing disturbed. And then, with my ear pressed against the underside of the RV frame, I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Not the desert wind. Heavy, slow, measured breaths, rising from the ground itself. I scrambled out, slamming my head against the bumper, and backed away with the flashlight shaking in my hand. The desert looked the same, still silent, but I could feel it now, pulsing under my boots like a living thing. I didn't sleep. I sat up at the dinette, staring out the window, waiting for sunrise. The static whispered on and off through the night, never loud, never gone. By morning, I'd made up my mind to leave. But when I stepped outside, something was wrong. The ridge to the east, the one I'd parked against 2 nights before, it was closer. Not by much, maybe 20 or 30 yards, but close enough that I knew it hadn't been that way yesterday. I pulled out my phone, checked the GPS coordinates. They hadn't changed. The RV hadn't moved, which meant the land itself had shifted. I drove fast that day, faster than I should have on narrow roads that wound north through the mountains. Every mile I put between me and that place felt like pulling a thorn from my skin. By dusk, I reached a small forest campground outside Bishop. Pines surrounded the site, their needles whispering in the wind, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. There were 3 other RVs there. I nodded at a man chopping wood by his fire and parked at the far end of the loop. Normalcy, I told myself. Just people, trees, firelight. I set up camp, made coffee, tried to relax. That night, as I sat by my own fire, the man from earlier walked over. His name was Ellis, retired trucker from Kansas. He looked at me for a long moment before asking, "You hear it too, don't you?" I didn't know how to answer. He nodded like I'd confirmed something anyway. "Started for me near Tonopah," he said. "Static on the radio, voices in the dark. Thought I was losing it until I met others. We call it the signal. Once you tune in, you can't tune out. You'll leave camp, drive states away, and it'll follow, because it isn't out there." He tapped the side of his head. "It's in here now." He left without another word. That night, the signal grew louder. The static wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was bleeding into the air itself, a constant hiss, like the whole forest was alive with interference. Every branch that cracked, every pine needle that shifted sounded warped, like someone was replaying the noise a half-second later. At one point, I heard laughter. Not loud, not joyful, just a soft, childlike giggle drifting between the trees. I rushed to the window, but no one was there. The fire had burned low, casting weak orange light across the dirt. My reflection in the glass was faint. But behind it, just for an instant, I saw another face. Pale, thin, eyes too large, watching me. I stumbled back, slammed the blinds shut, and tried to convince myself it was a trick of light. But when I finally closed my eyes, the voice came again. Not static this time, clear, cold, deliberate. "Do you hear it now?" And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't asking me if I could hear it. It was asking if I believed. By dawn, my nerves were raw. I'd barely slept, if you could call it sleep at all. Every time I drifted, the hiss would swell into words, and the words would turn into whispers pressed right against my ear. Sometimes it was my name, sometimes it was nonsense, sometimes it was my own thoughts thrown back at me in a voice that wasn't mine. I packed up as fast as I could. Ellis was gone. No trace of his RV, no chopped wood, no embers from the fire. The spot where he'd been was empty, as if he'd never existed. That unsettled me worse than anything. I drove out without breakfast, without a plan, just aiming north along Highway 395. But the road wasn't right. You drive long enough in the American West, you learn its rhythm, the way towns appear at intervals, the way landscapes stretch but eventually shift. That day, the road felt looped. I'd pass a certain gas station, old red pumps, rusted sign, boarded windows. 15 miles later, it was there again. Identical, another 20 miles, again. The same broken glass, the same tilted pole, the same shape of tumbleweed leaning against the fence. I stopped the second time, convinced I'd lost my bearings. I walked up to the pump, touched the rust with my bare hand, just to prove to myself it was real. The metal was cold, gritty, biting into my palm. When I got back into the RV, I checked the odometer. It had ticked up exactly 15 miles. I wasn't circling, I was being pulled. That was when the temperature dropped. Not just cool desert air, the kind of cold that slices through insulation, the kind that makes breath hang thick and white. My heater clicked on automatically, but it didn't help. I could see my own breath fogging the windshield. My hands shook on the wheel, and then I saw her. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, standing on the shoulder of the road ahead. She wore a faded yellow dress, dirt smeared across the hem, hair hanging in her face. She didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there staring as I slowed. Every instinct screamed at me not to stop, but I did. I opened the window, called out, "Hey, you okay? Do you need help?" She tilted her head just slightly. Then she spoke. "Do you hear it now?" My chest locked up. Her voice wasn't right. It wasn't a girl's voice at all. It was layered, deep and hollow, like dozens of mouths speaking in unison. The air around me buzzed, the static pressing harder in my ears until I thought my skull might split. I slammed the gas, swerving around her, and when I glanced in the side mirror, she was gone. No footprints, no dust stirred, nothing. That was the moment I crossed from dread into panic. I drove for hours, white-knuckled, ignoring the fuel gauge, ignoring the way the static rose and fell like a heartbeat. The road bled into twilight, mountains looming darker on each side, sky bruised purple and black. I don't remember stopping, don't remember parking. I just remember waking up in the bunk, drenched in sweat, every window fogged from the inside. And I wasn't alone. I heard footsteps inside the RV. Slow, deliberate. Wood creaked under weight that wasn't mine. My breath caught in my throat as I lay frozen, listening. A step by the sink, a pause, a step by the dinette, the faint scrape of a hand against the wall. I told myself not to move. Don't breathe, don't make a sound. But then from the darkness at the foot of my bunk, I heard it whisper again. Do you hear it now? I snapped. I lunged for the switch, flooding the RV with light. Empty. The space was empty. No one by the sink, no one by the table, no one standing at the end of my bed. But the static was louder than ever, hissing from every corner, filling every vent, every outlet, every crack of space like the air itself was unraveling. My vision doubled, and for a sickening moment, I thought I saw the walls of the RV breathing in and out. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my keys, started the engine, and peeled out into the night. I didn't care about where I was going anymore, only that I was moving, faster and faster, until the shaking in my chest matched the RPMs. But here's the part that makes my blood run cold even now. When I looked at the rearview mirror, I saw faces. Not one, not two, dozens of pale faces pressed against the inside of the back window, staring out at the road behind me, and none of them were mine. I remember gripping the wheel so tight that my hands went numb. The headlights carved two thin tunnels through the dark, and the world outside them was absolute black. No stars, no horizon, no shape. Just those faces in the rear window, watching. Some looked human, others didn't. Their eyes seemed to move out of sync, like reflections that had learned how to move without mirrors. I didn't dare look back again. I just drove. The speedometer crept past 70, then 80, then 90. The road twisted and narrowed, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. I kept thinking, if I stop, they'll catch up. The radio burst to life. No input, no power, no reason. And the static wasn't static anymore. It was 1,000 overlapping voices, whispering fragments of sentences, my name, the word home, the sound of crying. A woman's laughter that turned into a low growl. Then the engine sputtered. The dashboard lights flickered and died. The steering wheel stiffened under my hands. I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, heart hammering in my throat. For a long moment, all I heard was the ticking of cooling metal and that awful whispering that hadn't stopped. I stepped out into the cold. The air was wrong, too still, too heavy. The silence felt thick enough to drown in. I walked around the RV, half expecting to see claw marks or some rational damage, but the body was untouched. The only thing that looked different was the reflection in the windows. It wasn't me. The figure in the glass was standing a step closer than I was, eyes open wider, mouth moving silently. It lifted its hand before I did, and then I heard something else. Behind me this time. Gravel crunching under bare feet, slow, measured, coming closer. I turned, flashlight trembling. The beam cut through the dark and landed on nothing, just empty desert. Except the sound didn't stop. It passed right through me, like something walking through the same space but not in the same world. I felt the air displace, a current brushing against my neck, colder than death. The whisper was next to my ear now, soft and almost kind. Do you hear it now? That broke me. I jumped into the driver's seat, hit the ignition again. Nothing. I tried once more. The starter coughed, then caught, the engine roaring back to life with a shudder. I floored it. The headlights caught movement in the side mirror. Just for an instant, I saw a blur running alongside the RV, keeping pace, then vanishing behind a cloud of dust. I didn't stop until dawn. When I finally did, I was parked on the edge of a lake I didn't recognize. My GPS read 0 coordinates, no data, no map. The surface of the water was glassy, reflecting the pale light of morning. For the first time in hours, I thought I was safe. But then I saw it. In the water's reflection, the RV wasn't behind me. It was still out there on the road. And someone was standing beside it. I stared, heart pounding, unable to move. The reflection shifted slightly, just enough for me to realize the figure standing next to the RV was me. Same jacket, same hat, same scars. But the expression on that version of me was empty, like a photograph of a man who'd already given up. I fell to my knees, staring into the rippling water, and whispered the only thing that came to mind. Why? And somewhere, faint but clear, the voice answered, "You came looking." That's when I understood. This thing, whatever it is, it doesn't hunt at random. It follows the curious. It waits for those who try to make sense of what should be left alone. I'd gone digging for explanations in whispers and static, and the wilderness had answered back. I sat there for a long time, the morning sun rising higher, the reflection of my other self fading as the light grew stronger. For the first time since this began, the world felt solid again. Birds started calling in the trees. Wind rippled across the lake. Maybe I escaped. Maybe I just slipped into another version of escape. All I know is that ever since that night, the radio in my RV turns itself on every morning at 3:17 a.m. sharp. No station. Just the same hiss, faint and steady, waiting. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I let it play. I tell myself it's just feedback, random noise, nothing more. But every now and then between the static, I still hear that voice, soft, almost gentle, asking the same question that's haunted me ever since. Do you hear it now? And the worst part is, I do. The Ghost Trail of Sawtooth Mountains, the Vanished Team. The first thing I remember was the silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that feels wrong, like the world itself is holding its breath. I was parked near the edge of the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, the air thin and chilled, the pine trees still slick with the scent of last night's rain. My name's Eli Mercer. I'm 34, an outdoor videographer who's been documenting forgotten trails and abandoned campsites across the Northwest for nearly a decade. Most of my stories are about people, hikers, rangers, campers, and how nature pushes them to their limits. But this one wasn't supposed to be about people at all. It was supposed to be about a trail, a forgotten one. Locals in Stanley, Idaho had mentioned it over coffee at the diner, something they called the Ghost Trail. They said it used to connect a series of fire lookouts deep in the Sawtooth Range before it was closed after a crew of trail maintenance workers vanished back in '96. 5 men, 1 woman, no signs, no reports, just a camp left half standing and their tools rusting where they dropped them. Most locals didn't talk about it. Those who did would finish quickly, eyes down, like the forest was listening. I thought it was a story, a good one for the channel. Something about memory, wilderness, and the fragility of control out here. But I didn't believe in ghost stories. The plan was simple: spend 3 nights tracing the route using my old RV as base camp near Redfish Lake, then hike into the first 3 miles of the old trail to film some B-roll. I'd done harder trips, lonelier ones too. Still, the ranger who issued my backcountry permit had given me a long look before stamping the form. "Don't stray past the 4th mile," she said. "The forest past there isn't right." I laughed, thinking she was just repeating some old local superstition. She didn't laugh back. By late afternoon, I parked near the old service road that led toward the trailhead. My RV, a '94 Gulfstream, hummed quietly as I made coffee and checked the weather radio. Clear skies, no storms for days. I recorded an intro clip, setting up my camera on a small tripod outside the RV. The golden light washed the peaks, and I remember saying something like, "The Sawtooths aren't haunted, they're just misunderstood." When I played that clip back later, my own voice sounded different, flatter, like someone else was speaking through me. That night, something woke me around 2 a.m. A sound, soft, rhythmic, like metal tapping gently against wood. It came from outside, somewhere near the tree line. My first thought was a branch in the wind, maybe hitting the RV side panel. But the air was still. When I looked out the window, the forest was dark, darker than I'd ever seen it. Even the stars seemed muted, like something heavy was sitting on the sky. I told myself not to open the door, not to feed my own paranoia. But curiosity, that old journalist's flaw, pulled me anyway. When I stepped outside, barefoot, breath fogging in the cold, I saw nothing but trees. The sound had stopped. But the moment I turned back toward the RV, I noticed prints in the damp soil. Not boots. Bare feet. 6 pairs. Each one small, adult-sized, spaced evenly, walking from the forest toward the RV and then back again. Like they'd circled it. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe old prints revealed by rain. Maybe animals, though I'd never seen tracks so human in shape. Still, I pushed forward. I packed light, camera, flashlight, GPS, and a small pack of food, and followed the overgrown service road to the ghost trail entrance. The sign was barely legible: Sawtooth Fire Line, Trail Maintenance Access. Below it, faintly carved in the wood, was something that looked like letters but wasn't English. The first few miles were uneventful. The forest was dense, cold even in daylight, the pines packed so tight their branches knitted overhead. I found remnants of the old trail crew's work: rotted timber bridges, rusted nails, orange survey tape fluttering from branches. Around mile 3, I found something else: a collapsed tent half buried in moss. Inside were old rations, a cracked canteen, and a notebook sealed in a plastic bag. The cover read, Trail Crew 96, JT Ihe. Most of the pages were ruined by moisture, but a few lines were legible. The last entry chilled me. Open quote, Day 14. We heard them again last night. They move like us, sound like us, but they don't leave when we shine the light. Don't go past the ridge, close quote. I looked up from the page, and for a moment, I swear I heard voices, faint, overlapping, just beyond the ridge. Laughter, low and strange, like hearing your own echo twisted in someone else's mouth. I ran back toward camp, half convincing myself it was the wind. That evening, back in the RV, I replayed the day's footage. At first, everything was normal: the hike, the trees, the tent. But near the end, just before I turned around, there was movement in the corner of the frame. 6 figures, standing in the trees, perfectly still, watching. Their outlines seemed wrong, slightly transparent, like reflections in heat shimmer. I didn't sleep that night. The tapping came again, but this time it was closer, on the metal side door of the RV. Slow, measured, like fingers. When I finally built the courage to look, there were 6 smudges on the window, handprints, perfectly clean, as if pressed from the inside. The next morning, I decided I had to leave. I packed up, turned the key, and the engine wouldn't start. The battery light flickered, even though I'd charged it the day before. I checked under the hood, cables, fuses, everything. Nothing wrong, just dead. The silence around me felt heavier now, like the forest itself was leaning in. I started to walk toward the ranger station, about 7 miles down the access road. Every few minutes, I heard twigs snapping behind me. Never close, but constant. When I stopped, the sound stopped too. When I walked again, it followed. The feeling of being mimicked was worse than being chased. It felt like the world was studying me, waiting for me to make a mistake. By late afternoon, the road curved toward a small clearing, and there it was. An old trail maintenance camp, almost untouched by time. 6 tents, half collapsed, a rusted chainsaw still leaning against a stump, a burned-out fire pit with tools scattered around it. The air smelled faintly of wet ash, like the fire had only just gone out. That's when I saw them again. Not as figures this time, but as outlines, silhouettes moving between trees, their shapes bending slightly like heat rising from asphalt. My chest tightened. I tried to speak, to say anything, but my throat felt locked. Then I heard something. A man's voice, hoarse, right behind me. Don't go past the ridge. I spun around, but no one was there. Just the whisper of wind moving through pine needles. I ran. I didn't look back. I followed the service road until dusk, lungs burning, hands shaking. When I finally reached the RV again, the door was open. The lights inside were on. My camera, which I'd left charging on the counter, was gone. And then I noticed something scratched into the dirt beside the tires. 6 sets of prints again, but this time they led straight toward the driver's door and vanished into the ground. I stood there frozen, staring at those prints as the last light drained from the valley. The ground where they disappeared was dry, compact, impossible to sink into. Yet the soil was disturbed, like something had pressed straight down and vanished through it. My breath came out ragged, my pulse hammering in my ears. I remember thinking I could still turn the key, that maybe the RV would start now if I just forced it. I scrambled inside, slammed the door, locked it, and twisted the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. The silence that followed felt alive. Every creak of the RV shell seemed amplified. Every gust of air against the vents carried weight. My flashlight flickered as if it were breathing. I tried to calm myself by talking into my recorder, a habit from years of fieldwork, explaining what I'd seen, rationalizing it out loud so it couldn't take root in my imagination. Tracks, maybe washed-out prints, probably hikers, I said. Could be locals messing around. But my voice sounded weak, not convincing. Then, in the middle of my sentence, a sound came from beneath the RV, a dragging scrape, slow and deliberate, like something metallic being pulled against the undercarriage. I froze. My first instinct was to look out the window, but every angle was black. I turned off the flashlight, holding my breath. The scraping stopped. A moment later, something knocked. Once. Twice. 6 times. Perfectly spaced. It came from the roof this time. I stared up, half expecting to see an outline through the ceiling vent. Instead, the vent's plastic cover rattled, and a small puff of dust fell through, as if someone had pressed their hand right on top. My instincts screamed to get out, to run, but my body wouldn't move. I sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel like it could protect me, until exhaustion took me somewhere between fear and numbness. When I opened my eyes again, it was dawn. The air was blue with fog. My camera was sitting back on the counter. Its battery was drained, even though I hadn't used it since yesterday. I didn't remember putting it there. When I turned it on, the screen flickered, and a single new clip appeared. Time-stamped 3:17 a.m. I pressed play. The footage was shaky, dark. The camera had been set up outside, facing the RV. I could see myself through the window, asleep at the table. Around the RV were 6 figures, silhouettes again, standing just at the edge of the fog, perfectly still. Then, one by one, they stepped forward and faded into the RV's reflection. The video ended there. That was when I broke. I packed what I could, grabbed the emergency radio, and left everything else behind. The road back towards Stanley felt endless. The sun was rising, but it gave no warmth. I must have walked for hours until the trees began to thin and the peaks of the Sawtooths came into full view. That was when I saw the ranger station ahead, but there was no truck, no ranger outside. Just the building, door wide open, radio static echoing through the doorway. Inside, the air was cold. Papers were scattered across the floor, old incident reports, maps, and one folder labeled Trail Crew Recovery 1996. Inside were 6 photographs. Each one showed the missing workers, tired, smiling, leaning against their tools. But what froze me wasn't their faces. It was the background. Their camp. The same camp I'd found yesterday. The same one I'd filmed. Except in the photographs, there was a 7th figure standing behind them. Blurred, pale, with no visible face. I turned toward the sound of footsteps behind me. For a split second, I saw a shadow move past the open door. I called out, "Hello?" and immediately regretted it. The shadow stopped. Then it slowly stepped back into view. It wasn't a person. It was a shape, human in outline, but hollow inside like smoke in the form of a man. And as I watched, 5 more emerged from the tree line behind it, their movements fluid, wrong, bending light around them. I stumbled backward, crashing into the desk, knocking the radio onto the floor. It burst into static, loud and violent. Then, through the static, I heard a voice, faint, layered, echoing itself over and over. Open quote, "You shouldn't have come back." Close quote. The figures began to move closer, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. My breath turned white. I reached for my flashlight, but it flickered and died the moment I turned it on. I ran for the back door, slamming it open and sprinting down the service path. I didn't stop running until I reached the old highway where the tree line broke. A Forest Service truck was parked there, engine idling, driver's door open. I didn't question it. I jumped in and slammed it into drive, gravel spraying behind me. The road curved along the ridge, and when I finally dared to look in the rearview mirror, I saw them. 6 figures standing in the middle of the road, unmoving, watching as I drove away. I made it to Stanley by late morning. The town was quiet, half the shops still closed. I parked near the diner and stumbled inside. The waitress looked up, startled. I must have looked like I'd been through hell, covered in dirt, shaking, pale. She asked if I was okay. I told her what I'd seen, or tried to. When I mentioned the ghost trail, her face went blank. "Trail's been closed since '96, she said softly. "You couldn't have gone there. It's fenced off, washed out years ago." I told her I'd walked it, that I'd found the old camp, the tents, the notebook. She just shook her head. "Honey," she said, "they cleared that site a long time ago. Nothing left but dirt and pine." I didn't argue. I just sat there, staring at the coffee steaming in front of me. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Later that afternoon, I went back to the ranger station with 2 deputies. The path was there, but when we reached the area where the camp had been, there was nothing. No tents, no fire pit, no tools, just a clearing, flat, untouched, as if nothing had ever stood there. They thought I imagined it, maybe exhaustion, dehydration. But that night, when I checked the footage on my camera again, something new had appeared. A final clip, time-stamped at 4:22 a.m., hours after I'd fled. It showed the inside of my RV. The door was closed, lights off. Then, one by one, 6 faint outlines appeared, standing in a circle around the table where I'd slept. The camera slowly panned toward the table, and there, etched into the wood, were words I'd never written. Open quote, "We're still waiting at the ridge. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't." The message burned into the table, wouldn't leave my mind, even after I smashed the camera and buried it behind the RV park in Stanley. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 6 figures standing by the ridge, patient, silent, like they'd been waiting all along for someone to remember them. I told myself it was a hallucination, that exhaustion and fear had bent my senses. But then I remembered the scratches on the RV door. The handprints, the way the air had gone still when I said their names from the photographs. There was something unfinished about them, like they were stuck in that last moment of disappearance, forever repeating the same loop. A few days later, I tried to leave Idaho. I drove south toward Boise, desperate for noise and traffic and life. The forest gave way to open land, and for a while, I thought I'd left it all behind. But 40 miles out, something strange happened. The radio began to cut out, filling with bursts of static. Beneath the static, a faint rhythm pulsed. 6 beats, slow and deliberate, just like the knocks on the RV. Then a voice, low and broken, came through. Open quote, "Don't go past the ridge." Close quote. I pulled over so fast I nearly skidded off the shoulder. My phone had no signal. The sky had gone gray, though the forecast said clear. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, until the static faded and the voice was gone. I should have kept driving. Instead, I turned back. I told myself it was to face it, to film it properly this time, to understand. But deep down, I think it was guilt. Guilt for leaving them behind. I returned to Redfish Lake 3 days later. This time, I didn't take the RV. I rented a pickup, packed a tent, and brought new cameras. Thermal, night vision, even an old cassette recorder. If something was there, I was going to document it. I parked near where the ghost trail should have started, though I couldn't find the sign anymore. Just an old post, half buried in soil. Yet when I stepped beyond it, the trees looked the same. Dense, silent, watching. I followed the path by memory, counting my steps. Around the 3rd mile, I found something I hadn't seen before. A small clearing, littered with broken tools. A faded hard hat with JT written in marker, the same initials from the notebook. Nearby, a narrow trench cut into the earth, maybe a foot deep. Inside it lay 6 stones arranged in a perfect circle, each stone marked with a crude carving, a name. The last one read Eli Mercer. I dropped to my knees, my heart hammered so hard it hurt. The stone looked freshly carved, the edges sharp, clean, like someone had made it recently. My camera trembled in my hands. "This isn't real," I whispered, backing away. "This can't be real." But the forest had gone utterly still. No birds, no wind, only the faint crackle of static coming from the cassette recorder in my pocket, though it wasn't even turned on. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. 6 shadows emerging between the pines, their outlines flickering in and out like failing film. I ran. My breath tore through the silence, the ground uneven beneath my boots. I tripped, caught myself, and looked back, but they weren't chasing me. They were standing in a semicircle around the stones, as if guarding them, watching me leave. By the time I reached the road again, the sun was sinking and fog was starting to roll down from the ridge. My truck looked smaller than I remembered, almost out of place against the enormity of the forest. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking. When I finally looked up, they were there. 6 faint silhouettes standing at the edge of the trees, perfectly still, as if they'd followed me without moving at all. I drove straight to Boise that night, no stops. I checked into a cheap motel off the interstate and drew the curtains tight. I tried to call someone, my sister, a friend, but every time I started explaining, the words fell apart. I sounded insane even to myself. I didn't tell anyone about the stone. I didn't tell them that I'd brought it with me, tucked inside my pack. That was my mistake. The first night in Boise, I woke to knocking, soft, rhythmic, coming from the motel's bathroom door. I turned on the light. The door was closed. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet pine, though I was miles from the mountains. When I stepped closer, the knocking stopped. Then, faintly, from the other side of the door, came a whisper. Not one voice, but 6, overlapping, distorted by distance. Open quote, finish the trail. Close quote. I stumbled back, heart pounding. I grabbed my pack, threw it open, and pulled out the stone. It was damp, glistening as though it had just been pulled from the earth. My name was still carved into it, but now, beneath it, a second line had appeared. Return what you took. I didn't sleep after that. By morning, I was already driving north again. I didn't stop for gas until the tank was nearly empty. Didn't eat, didn't think. All I knew was that they wanted the stone back. Maybe that was all they ever wanted, to be left undisturbed. When I reached the trailhead again, the sky was overcast, the air thick with the smell of coming rain. I walked into the woods carrying only the stone. No camera, no pack. I followed the path by instinct, my pulse syncing with the rhythm of my steps. Somewhere around the ridge, I began to hear voices again. Faint, familiar, blending with the wind. They weren't threatening now. They sounded tired. When I reached the clearing, the circle of stones was still there. I placed mine back in its spot. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the air shifted, a low hum rolling through the trees, followed by a deep, quiet stillness that felt like release. The static in my ears faded. The forest began to sound alive again, a bird call, a branch creaking, the wind moving softly through pine. I stood there, breathing hard, waiting for something else, but nothing came. Just peace. And in that peace, I realized something. The trail crew hadn't vanished because they were taken. They'd vanished because they'd never left. They'd become part of this place, echoes caught in its rhythm. I disturbed that rhythm when I came searching for stories. When I walked back toward the road, the forest didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt heavy but calm, watching but not waiting. That was 6 months ago. I sold the RV. I stopped filming. I still think about going back sometimes, not to record, but to listen. Because every now and then, when the night is quiet enough and the wind shifts just right, I can hear it. 6 faint knocks in the distance, followed by a whisper that almost sounds like gratitude. Open quote, trail complete, close quote. And I think maybe finally they found their way home. But peace doesn't last long when something inside you is still unfinished. I wish I could say that the voices stopped, that the dreams ended the moment I returned that stone. But they didn't. They only changed. A month after I came back from the Sawtooths, I moved into a small rental near Twin Falls, far enough from the mountains that I could pretend they didn't exist. I thought distance would silence whatever lingered in me. For a while, it almost worked. The days felt normal. I worked freelance, editing, hiking footage for other filmmakers, spent my evenings running, trying to burn the restlessness out of my chest. But every few nights I'd wake up before dawn, hearing that same slow rhythm. 6 knocks, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the walls. It wasn't loud, it was almost polite, a reminder. The worst part wasn't fear anymore, it was recognition. I'd lived in that rhythm for weeks out there. I knew its cadence better than my own heartbeat. It was them, still trying to speak through whatever thin layer separated their world from mine. One night in December, I woke again to the sound, but this time there was something new. A faint scratching, like a pencil dragging across paper. I turned on the light, expecting to see nothing, but there, on the small desk by the window, lay a single sheet of paper. It was blank except for one thing: 6 sets of fingerprints pressed in ash, forming a circle. My name was written faintly in the center, as if traced in breath. That broke something in me. I packed what little I owned and left that same night, driving aimlessly through the dark Idaho backroads. I didn't have a destination, just a compulsion to keep moving. Every time I passed through pine country, I felt it. The pressure in the air, the faint hum in my ears, like the forest was remembering me. Somewhere outside Ketchum, the fog began rolling in thick. The road narrowed, and before I realized it, I was driving past the same ridges that bordered the Sawtooth wilderness. I should have turned around, but part of me knew this was where it was always going to end. When the fog cleared, I saw a flicker of light ahead, an old ranger station, its porch lamp still burning. I pulled over, engine idling. It was the same building I'd run from that morning months ago, though I hadn't planned to come near it again. I stepped out, the cold biting deep, and started toward the door. The woods around me were silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. Inside, the air smelled like pine sap and old dust. The furniture was gone, stripped bare, except for one object left on the floor: my camera. The same one I'd destroyed and buried in Stanley. It looked untouched, as if I'd never laid a hand on it. I didn't want to touch it. I did anyway. The moment I lifted it, the screen blinked on. No battery, no power cord, and a single clip appeared. Timestamp, the next morning after I had returned the stone. I pressed play. The footage showed the clearing where the stones had been, sunlight breaking through the trees. Then, faintly, the outline of 6 people appeared. Solid now, not smoke, not shimmer. They were standing in a circle, heads bowed, and in the middle of them stood someone else, a 7th figure. Me. I watched myself lift my head and look straight at the camera, eyes vacant, calm. My lips moved, and though there was no sound on the video, I could read the words. Open quote, trail complete, close quote. Then the footage cut to black. For a long time, I stood there, unable to breathe. It was like watching a version of myself I didn't remember becoming, a version that belonged to the forest now. The realization crept through me, slow and steady, colder than any fear I'd ever felt. Maybe I never left the trail at all. Maybe part of me stayed behind the moment I touched that notebook, the moment I followed those prints, the moment I became the 7th stone. When I stepped outside, dawn was breaking, a faint orange glow cutting through the mist. The world felt lighter somehow, thinner, like the barrier between things had worn down. I walked back toward the truck, and when I opened the door, I saw it, etched faintly into the steering wheel in thin, precise lines. Open quote, we remember you, close quote. I started the engine, though part of me knew I wasn't driving away anymore. I was only circling back, following a loop that never truly ends. That's what the ghost trail is. It isn't a place, it's a rhythm, a call. And once you hear it, once it answers you, it never really lets you go. Even now, when I camp anywhere near the woods, I hear them sometimes, not as screams, not as ghosts, but as echoes in the wind. 6 steady knocks, a whisper carried through pine needles, soft and unthreatening. Open quote, stay on the trail, close quote. It's their warning now, maybe their gift. I don't run from it anymore. I listen. I let it remind me that every story out here leaves a mark, and every mark in time becomes part of the forest. So when you drive north through Idaho and see those mountains standing sharp against the sky, don't go chasing the ghost trail. Don't go looking for the vanished team, because they're not lost anymore. They're home, and some of us are already with them. There's a strange calm that comes after fear, that hollow stillness that makes you realize you've crossed some invisible line. I live in that stillness now. I still film from time to time, Short nature clips, nothing about ghosts or trails or vanishing teams. I keep the camera aimed at ordinary things. Wind rippling over a lake, dust floating through sunlight, a deer standing perfectly still before vanishing into the brush. But sometimes, when I review the footage later, I see something behind the frame, a blur between trees, or the faint outline of 6 shadows standing where no one should be. I don't get scared anymore when that happens. There's a kind of peace in it, a reminder that some bonds can't be severed by distance or time, that not everything that follows you means harm. Some things just want to be remembered. Every year, on the same week I first stepped onto that forgotten path, I drive north again. I don't take the old trailhead. It's fenced now, sealed by the Forest Service, warnings nailed into the wood. But I park nearby, just close enough to see the ridge rising through the mist. I set up camp, light a small fire, and sit quietly. No filming, no notes, just listening. The forest has a rhythm most people miss. It breathes in ways that sound like speech, branches creaking in patterns, wind brushing over stones in whispers. If you stay long enough, it starts to sound like language. And if you listen long enough, you start to understand pieces of it. That first night back, I always hear them. Faint knocks drifting from deep in the trees, 6 slow, even beats. Not menacing, not mournful, just steady. I can almost tell them apart now. There's a rhythm to each one, a cadence like how people speak when they're together, a team still working in unison, still clearing the way. Last year, I brought something with me, the notebook I found in that collapsed tent, the one that belonged to JT. It had gone missing after everything, but a park ranger mailed it to me, saying it had been found sealed in a plastic bag wedged in a rock crevice near Redfish Lake. I read the pages again by firelight. The last entry had changed. The ink had faded, but new words had faintly beneath it, not written by the same hand. Open quote. The ridge is clear now. Close quote. I closed the notebook and sat there until the fire burned low. Around midnight, fog started to roll down the slope, soft and silver under the moon. I could see faint figures moving through it. 6 of them, spaced evenly, their outlines steady this time, solid. They didn't come closer. They didn't need to. I felt something pass through me. Not fear, not sadness, just release. They turned toward the ridge, and as the fog swallowed them, the forest exhaled, a long, low sigh that rustled every branch around me. The air grew warmer, the silence lighter. And I knew, without words, that they'd finally gone wherever they'd been waiting to go. I sat there until dawn, letting the forest wake. When I finally stood and looked down the trail, there was nothing left. No footprints, no tools, no signs. Just the faint shimmer of morning light breaking through pine needles, painting everything gold. I drove away quietly that morning, the sun behind me, the road stretching out like a clean slate. The Sawtooth stood tall in the distance, unmoved by time or memory. I thought about how much of fear is really just the unknown asking to be seen. How much of horror, when you strip it down, is really about belonging to a place, a story, a history that refuses to forget you. These days, when people ask why I stopped filming haunted stories, I tell them the truth, that I didn't, that the forest still speaks, just not in screams or shadows. Sometimes it's in the hum of wind against pine bark, sometimes in the quiet pulse of your own heartbeat when you realize you're not alone. The ghost trail isn't a legend, it's a memory stitched into the land. It's every footprint that ever sank into that soil, every echo that ever refused to fade. The vanished team, they're part of that now. Maybe I am too. Before I leave each year, I walk to the edge of the tree line and whisper the same words I heard on that static-filled radio, the words that kept me alive long enough to understand. Open quote, stay on the trail. Close quote. And somewhere deep within the forest, I always hear it, a faint echo returning the phrase, soft and steady, carried by the wind. Open quote, trail complete, close quote. And for a moment, it feels like all of us, the lost, the searching, the haunted, are finally walking the same path home. My name's Caleb Morgan, I'm 42 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life chasing silence. The kind of silence that feels earned, the kind that settles deep into your bones after miles of asphalt and years of noise. When you live most of your life in a small RV, silence becomes both a companion and a test. And nowhere in this country tests that companionship quite like the Badlands. I'd been on the road for 6 months straight before I rolled into South Dakota that October. The air was dry, sharp, with that mineral tang that makes you think of old bones and wind-eroded cliffs. I'd read somewhere that the Lakota once called this place Mako Sika, Badland, not because it was evil, but because it was unforgiving. A landscape that wouldn't give you anything unless you were ready to meet it halfway. That's exactly what I wanted. A place that didn't talk back. The campground I picked wasn't much more than a stretch of flat land with a few hookups, a crooked picnic table, and a view of jagged ridges that looked like broken teeth. No one else was parked there that evening. The ranger had told me it was the off-season, a polite way of saying I'd be alone. When I stepped out of my RV that first night, the silence felt heavy, like a weight pressing on my ears. I could hear the blood moving through my own head. Every sound I made, the crunch of gravel, the squeak of the RV door, even the faint hiss of my breath, felt intrusive, wrong somehow. The horizon swallowed light fast out there, and the last colors of dusk burned away until the land was nothing but shadow. I made coffee on the small propane stove inside, the smell of it comforting against the cold. The wind hit the side of the RV now and then, but even that seemed muted, like the landscape was holding its breath. I tried to read, but the words wouldn't stay on the page. My thoughts kept slipping back to that stillness outside. Silence, real silence, has a sound of its own. You start to notice it moving, changing, folding in on itself. After a while, it begins to hum, not in your ears, but somewhere deeper. The first night, I told myself it was nothing. Just the wind, the emptiness, maybe even my own nerves. But by the second night, the silence felt different. It was colder than it should have been that October. The kind of chill that doesn't just bite. It lingers, seeps in through your clothes, through your skin, down into your thoughts. I stepped outside after midnight just to look at the stars. Because in the Badlands, the sky doesn't end. It stretches on forever, clear and sharp, like you could cut yourself on it. But standing there under that enormous black dome, I realized something strange. The silence wasn't everywhere anymore. It was close, centered around me. Beyond a certain point, maybe a few 100 feet out, I couldn't hear anything at all. No wind, no shifting gravel, no rustle of dry grass. The world stopped making sound past an invisible boundary. I stayed out there longer than I should have, staring into the dark shapes of the cliffs. I thought I saw movement once, a flicker of something pale near the edge of a ridge, but when I looked again, there was nothing. Just that same impossible stillness. When I went back inside, I left one of the windows cracked, just to let the air move. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard something. Not a voice, not quite. More like a rhythm. 3 slow thuds against the side of the RV. Then silence again. I waited, listening, but nothing followed. I wanted to believe it was the wind. I told myself it was the wind. The next morning, I found a trail of dust on the passenger side door. Not footprints exactly, just impressions. Smudges in the shape of hands that were too long, too wide, as if someone had pressed their palms against the metal in curiosity. I brushed it off and told myself it must have been the pattern of rain, though the sky had been clear for days. That's the strange thing about solitude. It blurs your judgment. You start to argue with yourself, to rationalize what doesn't fit. You say things like, maybe I'm just tired, or it's nothing, just shadows, when every nerve in your body knows it's not. By the third night, I was jumpy. I kept my lantern on low, just enough to see the outlines of the furniture inside. My old guitar sat by the door, strings loose from the dry air. I remember strumming it once, softly, just to break the quiet, but when the sound faded, something else answered. It wasn't an echo. It was delayed, too long after. The sound came from outside, faint but deliberate, as if someone was trying to repeat the notes I'd just played. That's when my skin went cold. I killed the lantern, pressed myself to the window. Nothing moved outside. No light, no figure, no reflection from another camper. Just the dark shapes of the ridges, the pale glow of the moon. Then, faintly, a chord. Off-key. Strained. Like someone plucking a string with hands that didn't understand music. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I just stood there, listening as the wind started again, carrying that broken sound away until it was gone. When morning came, I packed up to leave. I didn't care that I'd planned to stay a week. The Badlands had turned on me in a way I couldn't explain. But when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The battery was fine, the fuel full. I checked everything. Still, the engine wouldn't catch. That's when I noticed the silence again. It wasn't the natural quiet of dawn. It was that same suffocating stillness, the kind that felt alive, aware. I stepped outside, and every sound died behind me. Even my footsteps didn't echo. The cliffs looked different in daylight, bleached, empty, ancient, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from within them. Like the land itself had eyes. I walked a few yards from the RV, looking for any sign of help. Then I saw something etched into the dust behind my back wheels. A circle, perfectly round, and at its center, a handprint. Not human. Too long, too thin, each finger ending in a point. I stood there frozen, staring at it, my breath fogging in the still air. The silence stretched out, pressing harder, as if the land itself was waiting for me to respond. That's when I realized what was wrong with this place. The Badlands weren't empty. They were listening. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that what I'd seen in the dirt was just a trick of erosion, maybe even a distorted tire mark. But my gut knew better. That handprint wasn't shaped like anything I'd ever seen before. The fingers were too narrow, the spacing too unnatural, like they'd been dragged downward instead of pressed. I forced myself back inside the RV and locked the door out of habit, though I doubted any lock could help me if something wanted in. The silence hung there, still and unnatural, as if sound had been cut off from the world. Even the small clicks from the cooling stove were gone. I turned on the radio. Static. Every channel. I tried calling out on the CB. Nothing. You don't realize how much you depend on noise until it disappears. Even the hum of electricity, the whisper of wind through the vents. It's all part of what keeps you anchored. Without it, you start to lose your place in reality. My own breath became too loud in that absence. It echoed strangely, not from the walls, but from somewhere behind them. I stayed put until noon, convincing myself the truck might just need a rest before starting. When I finally turned the key again, it caught, just like that. The sound of the engine roaring to life hit me like a wave of relief, almost dizzying. I laughed out loud, more from nerves than anything. But as soon as I started rolling forward, that same low hum returned. The silence didn't lift. It moved with me. The hum wasn't mechanical. It was deeper, almost like a vibration under the tires, in the dirt itself. The road stretched ahead, twisting through canyons and ridges of cracked clay, pale as bone. I told myself I'd head west, back towards civilization. But the further I drove, the more the landscape repeated itself. Same formations, same cracks, same ridges. I checked my GPS. It said I was going in circles. I stopped the engine, stepped out. The air was too still again. No sound of cooling metal, no echo of my boots on the dry ground. I shouted just to break the tension. Hello. Nothing came back. No echo. No wind. Just a hole where sound should have been. I stood there a long moment, scanning the horizon. That's when I saw it. Far off between the spires of rock, something white. It looked like fabric, fluttering. I thought maybe it was another camper or a ranger flag. I started walking toward it. The ground under my boots was brittle, cracked in sheets that flaked away like ash. Every step felt like I was walking through a graveyard of something older than language. The air shimmered faintly, not from heat, it was too cold for that, but from some kind of distortion, like a vibration in the distance. The closer I got, the less certain I became that the white thing was fabric. It was moving, yes, but not with the wind. It pulsed, slow, rhythmic, breathing. I stopped, maybe 50 feet away. What I was seeing didn't make sense. It wasn't fabric at all. It was something like skin, pale and stretched, rising and falling as if exhaling from within the earth itself. And around it, faint impressions in the dust, too many handprints to count, all facing inward toward that pulsing center. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, but I couldn't move. The silence around me deepened, becoming physical, pressing into my ears, my chest, even my thoughts. It felt like being underwater, soundless and weightless. And then, a voice. Not heard, but felt. It was inside, brushing against the edges of my mind like static on an old speaker. No words at first, just tone. Something ancient, low, almost curious. Then, slowly, syllables began to form, heavy and drawn out. You came back? I froze. My throat went dry. The voice wasn't male or female. It was the voice of the land itself, the dust and stone speaking through the stillness. I don't know what you mean, I whispered, even though I wasn't sure if sound would carry. My words felt swallowed as soon as they left me. You left before. You always leave. The pulsing beneath the skin quickened. The ground trembled softly. My mind raced. Maybe I'd inhaled something. Maybe there was gas in the soil. I started backing away, but then I saw it. The impressions in the dirt, those handprints. They began to shift. One by one, they turned, aligning with where I stood. The prints nearest me deepened as if something beneath was pushing upward, reaching. I turned and ran. The silence broke in bursts. The sound of my boots hitting ground came in delayed fragments, as if reality was catching up. When I reached the RV, I slammed the door behind me and started the engine again. It coughed, hesitated, then roared. I threw it into drive and didn't look back. The road twisted through the canyons again, identical, endless. My GPS blinked out completely, showing only a gray void. I drove faster, desperate for any sign of another human being, another voice. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. The sun hung low and still, not setting, just burning pale behind a haze. Then, up ahead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. My campground. The same picnic table, the same cracked earth, the same outline of my own tire tracks in the dust. It wasn't possible. I parked, trembling, staring at the horizon. The silence was worse than before. My own heartbeat sounded foreign, mechanical. The land looked alive now, the ridges breathing slow and steady, their shapes subtly shifting as though something beneath the surface was stretching, waiting. I stepped outside again, against all reason. My body moved before my brain could stop it. And there it was, etched beside the old handprint behind my RV, a second circle. This time it wasn't empty. Inside it was a crude outline of a figure. Long limbs, a hollow head, arms outstretched like it was reaching for something. Or someone. I stared until my vision blurred. The stillness deepened again, and for a moment I thought I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Slow, deliberate, synchronized with the rhythm of the land. That's when I understood the Badlands weren't empty. They were hungry. Hungry for sound, for movement, for anyone foolish enough to come looking for silence. And I had given it exactly what it wanted. I ran back inside, slammed the lock again, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The air felt thick, charged, vibrating like the inside of a speaker on mute. I whispered to myself over and over, "It's not real. It's not real." But the whisper came back, delayed again, fractured like someone repeating after me through the walls. Not real. And then, in perfect time with my next breath, "But you are." I didn't sleep that night. The silence stayed alive, breathing through every crack in the RV. And just before dawn, I heard it again. The 3 slow thuds against the side of the metal, deliberate as a heartbeat. Only this time something thudded back inside, from behind the cabinets. The first thud rattled the plates in the cabinet above my head. The second one made the walls flex slightly, as though something inside the RV had shifted its weight. By the third, I was on my feet, holding my breath so tightly my lungs burned. The sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from within. I turned off every light, crouching low. My flashlight lay on the counter, but I didn't dare grab it. In that stillness, even the soft scrape of fabric could give me away. I listened. The silence didn't stay silent for long. There was movement, A faint drag, like something heavy sliding across the narrow floor, coming from the back of the RV where my bed was. I'd slept there the last 2 nights, unaware that something else might have been under me. "Hello?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The word vanished before it left my lips. No echo, no reflection. Then a breath, faint, almost human, exhaled from beneath the floorboards. My hands trembled as I reached for the flashlight, flipped it on. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the linoleum floor. It was dusted with a thin layer of pale powder, as if the desert had crept inside. I followed the line of powder to the base of the bed frame. There was a seam there I hadn't noticed before, a thin crack between the paneling and the metal. The sound was coming from below it, from the small compartment where I kept spare tools. I knelt, fingers brushing the latch. The metal was cold, damp. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to open it. But the sound was there again, a low hum, like a voice humming through soil. I pulled the latch. For a moment, there was nothing, just black space and the smell of rust. Then the air shifted, a soft rush of wind, though nothing outside was moving. The flashlight flickered once, and then I saw it. A face. No, not a face exactly, but the suggestion of one, pressed against the inside of the compartment. The shape of a mouth without a mouth, the hollow of eyes that were not eyes. It was as though the silence itself had taken form and pushed upward, wearing the memory of a face it had once consumed. I stumbled backward, slamming the panel shut. My heart was racing so fast I thought it would tear out of my chest. I jammed a wrench through the latch to hold it closed and sat against the wall, gasping. That's when the humming turned into whispering. It came from every direction, inside the vents, under the sink, from behind the walls. A chorus of overlapping voices that never spoke clearly, only murmured half syllables that bled together into a rhythm. They didn't sound angry. They sounded hungry. I shouted, "Leave me alone." And this time the sound echoed, not outward but inward. It bounced back from the metal and the dust and the still air, layered over itself until my own voice wasn't mine anymore. "Leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me." Each repetition came from somewhere else in the RV. Then it stopped, completely. The silence dropped again, so total that my ears rang with the absence of noise. And through that void, I felt something move beneath the floor. The RV shifted slightly, its weight changing as though something massive had rolled under it. I didn't move for hours. I couldn't. The light outside never changed. The sun hovered in a dull gray haze that made it impossible to tell what time it was. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off sitting upright because, when I opened my eyes, night had fallen. The temperature had dropped. Frost glimmered on the inside of the windows, my breath fogged in front of me. And from outside I heard it, music. Soft, faint, almost delicate. A guitar plucking a slow, uneven tune, the same one I'd played days ago. I crept to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see. There was someone, or something, standing by the picnic table in the weak glow of the moon. It was wearing something that looked like a coat, but too long, almost dragging. Its head tilted toward the RV as it plucked at the guitar in awkward, trembling motions, like it was remembering how. The song stopped mid-note. Then it began walking toward me. Slow, deliberate steps. I backed away from the window, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I grabbed the keys, though I knew the RV wouldn't start. The air inside grew colder with each step it took outside, and then the handle turned. I didn't think. I lunged forward and shoved my entire weight against the door. The handle twisted again, harder this time, until the metal groaned. Something scraped against it from the other side, fingers or claws or both. The whispering started again, only louder now, threading through the cracks in the RV. Not voices exactly, but the sound of air being forced into shapes it didn't belong. Then the knocking came, the same rhythm as before. 3 deliberate thuds. I shouted again, not words this time, just sound. Anything to drown out the silence that followed. And suddenly, the RV wasn't still anymore. It rocked violently, like something was pushing it from below. The table toppled. The lantern fell and shattered, casting brief flashes of light across the walls. For one heartbeat, I saw a hand press against the window from outside, thin, white, jointed, wrong. Then the silence returned with a vengeance. It was so heavy that it pinned me to the floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. A single whisper filled the void, close now, right beside my ear. You heard it too once. That's why you came back. The floor creaked beneath me. I forced my head up and saw the panel under the bed rising slowly as if pushed from below. I scrambled backward, hands searching for anything. The flashlight, a knife, anything solid. The wrench was still wedged in the latch, trembling as the panel lifted against it. For a moment, it held. Then it snapped. I bolted for the door. It wouldn't budge at first. The cold had sealed it tight. I slammed my shoulder against it once, twice. It burst open, and I stumbled out into the freezing air. The world outside had changed. The ridges around the campground looked different, taller, closer, as if they'd grown overnight. The sky was no longer black, but a dull gray that shimmered faintly, as if light was trapped behind it. And the silence, it followed. It wasn't confined to the RV anymore. It spread out in waves, swallowing everything. I ran. I didn't care where. My boots crunched against ground that didn't sound like dirt, more like glass. Each step made less sound than the last until I couldn't hear myself at all. I turned once, just once, to look back. The RV was gone. In its place was a shallow impression in the earth shaped like a circle, and at the center of it, that same figure. Pale, long-limbed, rising slowly, its outline barely holding together. As it straightened, it tilted its head toward me, the hollow space where its face should have been pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. It didn't chase me, it didn't need to, because the silence came with me. I don't remember how long I ran that night. The land seemed endless, like it was folding in on itself. Every time I thought I was climbing toward a ridge or heading downhill, the terrain would change beneath me. Cliffs became plains, plains became fissures. My boots slid through the dust and salt and fractured clay until they felt heavy with the weight of miles I couldn't account for. The sky was still gray, but darker now, the light diffused through an invisible fog. My throat ached from breathing the dry air. Every few minutes I stopped and turned in circles, trying to orient myself. There was nothing. No sound, no sign of the RV. And yet, something was still moving behind me. You can tell when you're being followed, even in silence. It's not the sound that gives it away, it's the feeling. A tightening at the base of your skull, a pulse of awareness that something is matching your rhythm exactly, waiting for you to stop. When I looked back, there were footprints, not mine. Long, dragging impressions, too wide for a human, stretching across the cracked surface like something crawling on hands and knees. I forced myself to keep walking. Talking out loud was the only way to keep my sanity, but even that didn't feel safe anymore. My words died the instant I spoke them. No echo, no air vibration, just erasure. It was like the world was swallowing sound itself. The Badlands are known for formations they call hoodoos, stone spires shaped by erosion, standing like ancient sentinels. I found myself among them by dawn. They loomed above me, striped and bone-colored, twisting in strange angles that made me feel dizzy if I stared too long. I stopped beside one that looked like a figure kneeling in prayer. The silence here felt heavier, thicker, as if the air itself were full of waiting. My legs shook with exhaustion, so I sat against the stone. That's when I noticed the carvings. They were faint, worn by time, but visible. Lines, spirals, circles within circles. At first, I thought they were old petroglyphs, maybe ancient symbols from the tribes that once passed through this land. But when I looked closer, my stomach turned. The shapes weren't carved into the rock. They were raised out of it, as if the stone had grown around them. Each spiral led to a small imprint, hand-shaped, elongated, the same as what I'd seen behind my RV, and in the center of the largest one, a name. My name, Cal E.B. The letters weren't perfect, uneven, stretched, but unmistakable. The last letter still looked wet, as though it had just finished forming. I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering, "No, this isn't real." The ground beneath the hoodoos began to tremble, faintly at first, then harder. I turned, scanning the horizon. The formations weren't still anymore. They were breathing. The ridges rose and fell like lungs exhaling dust. Cracks spread through the ground, long fractures that bled a pale mist. And somewhere deep within that tremor, I heard the hum again. Not with my ears, but through my chest, through my teeth. You returned to finish the silence. The voice, if that's what it was, came from everywhere. The air vibrated with it. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, trying to drown it out. No, I screamed, though my voice was instantly devoured. I'm not part of this. I don't belong here. But the voice didn't stop. You listened before. You remembered. You carried it. Images flickered through my mind, flashes of places I didn't remember visiting. Canyons, ridges, the same circles drawn in dirt, always surrounding something unseen. And me, standing in the middle of them, listening to the same hum, over and over. It hit me then. This wasn't my first time here. The memory came back like a wound reopening. Years ago, before the RV, before the endless road, I'd hiked here with a friend. His name was Tom. We were young, dumb, chasing sunsets and ghost stories. We camped near the edge of a dry basin, laughing at the stories locals told about the Silent Basin, a part of the Badlands where sound supposedly disappeared. That night, the wind had died, and Tom had dared me to walk to the center of the basin alone. 5 minutes, he'd said. If you make it, I'll buy you breakfast. I'd gone. I'd stood there in the dark, feeling the silence close around me, the same way it did now. Only that time I hadn't come back the same. Tom had vanished by morning. His footprints led in a circle. Mine led out. I'd told everyone he wandered off in the night. I'd told myself I couldn't remember. But the truth was, I'd heard something down there. A hum that filled my head, a whisper that said, "You belong to the quiet now," and I'd run. But you can't outrun silence, not the kind that knows your name. The realization hit like a punch. This was why I'd come back. Not consciously, but something in me had drawn me here, back to finish what I'd left behind. The humming grew louder, almost pleading now. The ground pulsed with it. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, the figure. The same one from the night before, pale, elongated, faceless. It stood among the hoodoos now, its shape blending with the stone. It didn't move toward me. It just tilted its head, almost human in its curiosity. And then I understood what it was. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't even a creature. It was the land, the voice of everything that had ever vanished here, a shape the silence used to speak. It phased its arms slowly, pointing past me toward the horizon. I turned. Far away, through the haze, I saw the faint outline of an RV. My RV, parked exactly where I'd left it, whole again. The voice spoke one last time, softer now. Finish what began. The ridges went still, the tremors stopped, the air cleared, leaving only the faint smell of rain. I started walking, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me knew it was the only way out. Each step felt heavier, but the silence receded just enough for the faint crunch of gravel to return. By the time I reached the RV, the sun was rising properly, the first real light I'd seen in days. I climbed inside. Everything was where I'd left it. The lantern unbroken, the table upright, even the air warm again. It felt wrong. Too normal. I started the engine. It turned over on the first try. I should have driven straight out, but I didn't. Not yet. Because there was something on the table, a small object I hadn't left there before. My old harmonica, the one Tom used to carry. The metal was tarnished, but when I picked it up, it was warm, like it had just been played. I lifted it to my lips before I could stop myself, drew in one soft note. It came out perfect, clear, steady. Then, from somewhere beyond the window, another note followed. Same pitch, same tone. The silence wasn't gone, it was answering. The sound lingered in the air, faint, trembling, impossibly clean. My heart seized with it. That note hung there too long, bending slightly at the edges, like the air itself couldn't decide whether to let it fade. Then another followed, soft, distant, echoing the tune I'd just played. I froze, harmonica halfway to my lips. Outside, the land was still. The hoodoos stood in the distance, motionless again, their pale forms glowing faintly in the early light. Nothing moved, and yet the air pulsed with the ghost of music. One note, two, then silence. I should have left right then, should have thrown the harmonica out the window, slammed the gas, and driven until the desert gave way to something green and living again. But I didn't, because there was something about that sound, something familiar. It was Tom's song, not a real one. Something he used to hum while we drove, when words ran out and the road stretched too long. Just a pattern of rising and falling notes, lazy and wandering. He'd play it on that same harmonica when the silence got too heavy, claiming it kept the land from swallowing him. And now it was playing back to me. I stepped outside, harmonica still in my hand. The sun had climbed a little higher, cutting the edges of the cliffs with pale gold. The air was sharp but still, and the sound of my boots crunching against the dry earth came back to me clearly. That alone felt like a small miracle. For the first time since I'd arrived, the silence wasn't absolute. There were hints of wind again, faint but there, the sigh of it through cracks in the cliffs, the faint whistle past the RV's antenna. I drew a long breath. Maybe I'd survived it. Maybe I'd outlasted whatever this place was. I started walking toward the ridge where I'd first seen the figure, half to prove it wasn't there anymore. But halfway across the clearing, I stopped. The ground beneath my boots wasn't dry anymore. It looked damp, darker than before. I crouched down, touched it. My fingers came away slick, not with water, but with something thicker. Clay? No, it was dust fused into a paste, still warm, and pressed into that wet clay was a new set of prints. Not the elongated handprints this time, footprints, human, barefoot. And beside each one, a faint ripple, like the outline of a shadow frozen in dust. They led away from the RV, down toward the basin where the silence had first begun. I followed them, against every sane instinct. The basin looked smaller in daylight, though maybe it was just an illusion. The air there was still heavy, but not as suffocating as before. The center of it shimmered slightly, like heat rising from asphalt. When I reached it, the humming started again. Faint, low, but somehow peaceful. It didn't hurt this time. It resonated through me instead, like my heartbeat was sinking to it. That's when I saw him, a figure sitting cross-legged in the middle of the basin, facing away, shoulders slumped, head bowed. For one brief, impossible moment, I thought it was another traveler. Then he turned his head, and I knew that face. It was mine, older, paler, eyes empty like he hadn't slept in years. The other me smiled faintly, then pointed to the harmonica in my hand. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't. My legs refused to move, so I raised it to my lips. He did too. We played, the same notes, the same slow melody that Tom used to hum. The sound filled the basin, growing louder until the wind joined in. The dust lifted and swirled, catching the light in ripples of gold and gray. For a moment it was beautiful. And then it stopped. The dust fell, the wind died, and the figure across from me was gone. But where he'd sat, the ground was smooth, polished like glass. I walked closer and saw the faint reflection of my own face staring back. Only when I blinked, the reflection didn't. It just watched me. Then, softly, impossibly, it smiled again. The humming ceased, everything went still, and the silence returned. But it was different now. It wasn't pressing or alive. It was empty, ordinary, the kind of silence you get before the day begins. I don't remember walking back to the RV. I just remember the sound of gravel under my boots, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The air was warm again. A crow called in the distance. That was the moment I finally cried. Not from fear, from relief, because I could hear again. I started the RV and drove until the Badlands shrank to shapes in the rearview mirror. The sky opened wider, the road straightened out, and the hum of the engine became the most human thing I'd ever known. But the silence didn't leave completely. It sat inside me, small and patient like a seed. Every once in a while, I'd switch off the radio, just to listen, not to the quiet around me, but to the quiet within. Sometimes, if I drive long enough through the plains, I hear a faint echo of that harmonica tune riding the wind behind me. and when I check the mirror for a split second, I swear I see another RV, identical to mine, trailing a few hundred feet back. Same color, same shape, and sometimes when the sun hits the glass just right, I can almost make out the driver. He looks a lot like me. When I pull over and the light changes, the second RV is gone. But the silence lingers for a while longer than it should, wrapping around me like an old friend. It's strange. People think of silence as absence, as something that happens when noise dies. But the Badlands taught me something else. Silence isn't empty. It's alive. It listens. And if you stay in it long enough, it learns your name. I still travel, though not as far now. I park near rivers or forests where sound moves freely, where life makes noise. But every time I close my eyes, I see that vast, broken land again. The ridges breathing in the distance, the dust rising like smoke, and somewhere deep in that gray horizon, something waiting, patient as stone, humming the tune of a harmonica carried by the wind. Sometimes I think about going back to see if it was real or if I just left part of myself there, but I know better now. You don't go back to the Badlands. The Badlands come back to you.